The first level of competence is the ability to follow instructions accurately. Can someone show you how a task should be done and trust you to reproduce it? This is foundational competence. Before you can improve a process, you need to demonstrate that you understand the process that already exists. At this level, repetition builds capability. Each attempt strengthens your memory, coordination, speed, and confidence. You may still need examples, checklists, or supervision, but the task gradually requires less conscious effort. What once demanded your full attention begins to feel familiar. Intelligence and reliability are not interchangeable. You can understand something quickly and still perform it inconsistently. In most environments, dependable execution creates more value than occasional flashes of brilliance. People need to know that the expected result will appear, not merely that you are capable of producing it. Asking a clear question is not evidence that you are incapable. It can be evidence that you care about getting the result right. Competent instruction followers clarify missing details instead of quietly guessing. The goal is not to appear as though you understand. The goal is to leave with enough clarity to execute accurately. Dependence becomes limiting when you can only move forward under familiar conditions. You may perform every demonstrated step perfectly, yet stop the moment the instructions end. At that point, the issue is no longer whether you can complete the task. It is whether you can determine what comes next. This is the employee who performs beautifully until the material is defective, the system changes, or a customer asks something outside the script. Their training prepared them to repeat a known sequence, but not to interpret a new situation. The unexpected event exposes the boundary of their current competence. People can remain at this level because they have learned that initiative carries risk. They wait for permission, additional instructions, or someone else to make the decision. That may protect them from making the wrong move, but it also prevents them from demonstrating that they can make a sound move independently. Advancement requires more than performing the same task correctly. You must begin recognizing patterns, retaining what previous situations taught you, and applying that knowledge without being walked through every step again. Level 2 begins when reliable execution becomes independent execution. You know the standard, understand the task, and can carry it forward yourself. Level 2, the independent operator. At this level, competence starts to look like independence. You can handle familiar responsibilities without someone constantly managing you through them. The question is no longer, can you follow the instructions? Now the question is, can you produce the expected result without being managed? The first shift is recognizing what needs to be done. You are no longer waiting for someone to identify every task for you. You can look at a familiar situation, notice what requires your attention, and understand what needs to happen next. The work is still within territory you know, but identifying the work is now part of your responsibility. Recognizing the work is only the beginning. You also have to initiate it. At level 2, you do not need repeated reminders to start a familiar responsibility. Once you know what is expected, you gather what you need, begin the task, and keep it moving without someone having to manage your momentum. Independence also requires knowing what done actually means. Completing the steps is not enough if the result misses the standard. You understand the expected outcome well enough to check your own work, recognize whether it is complete, and correct familiar problems before somebody else has to point them out. This is where judgment begins to develop. Familiar situations will not always look exactly the same, so you start making small decisions within territory you already understand. You know the process, you know the standard, and you can use both to decide how the work should be handled when the details vary. Eventually, I did exactly what you said stops being enough. You can technically complete an instruction and still leave obvious work unfinished. At level 2, you understand the purpose behind the task well enough to recognize when following the instruction literally will not actually produce the result that was needed. This is where ownership becomes different from task completion. Task completion asks, did I do my assigned part? Ownership asks, did the result actually get where it needed to go? You begin noticing the familiar loose ends connected to your work and handling them instead of automatically leaving them for somebody else. Working alone is not the same as operating independently. You can sit by yourself all day and still depend on someone else to tell you what to prioritize, when to begin, or whether you are finished. An independent operator can manage familiar work from beginning to end without continuous direction. But Level 2 still has a ceiling. Your independence works best inside situations you already understand. When something genuinely unfamiliar happens, you may still become dependent on someone else to determine the answer or show you how to proceed. That limitation is what keeps independence from becoming resourcefulness. Level 3, the resourceful problem solver. At this level, competence becomes most visible when you do not already know what to do. The core question is no longer whether you can manage familiar work. It is what happens when the instructions stop, the answer is unclear, or the solution you normally use is no longer available. Uncertainty exposes the difference between someone who can repeat a process and someone who can solve a problem. A resourceful person does not need to know the answer immediately. The competence is in how you respond. Whether you can examine what changed, identify what you need to learn, and keep the unknown from becoming a complete stop. Knowing how to search is a skill of its own. Resourcefulness is not typing a vague question and accepting the first answer you see. You have to define the problem clearly, use the right language, compare credible sources, and recognize which information actually applies to the situation in front of you. Resourcefulness also means knowing whom to ask. The nearest person is not always the right person, and asking everyone can create more confusion. You identify who has the relevant experience, explain what you have already tried, and ask a specific question that helps you move forward instead of asking someone else to solve the entire problem. Sometimes, the answer requires a tool you have never used. At Level 3, unfamiliarity does not automatically become avoidance. You learn what the tool is designed to do, study the instructions, practice safely, and build enough understanding to use it correctly. Learning the tool becomes part of solving the problem. Resourceful problem solvers test reasonable solutions. They do not make one desperate guess and hope it works. They form a sensible option, test it on a small scale when possible, compare the result to the standard, and adjust. Each test gives them information, even when the first solution is not the final one. I do not know, and I cannot are not the same statement. I do not know describes your current information. I cannot declares that no path exists. Level 3 keeps those two ideas separate. You can admit that you do not have the answer yet, while still taking responsibility for finding out what can be done. Improvisation does not mean becoming reckless. A resourceful person can adapt the process without ignoring safety, standards, or consequences. You work from what you already understand. Protect the parts that cannot be compromised. Test the adjustment carefully, and make sure the alternative still produces an acceptable result. Available resources are often more useful than they first appear. You may not have the exact tool, person, or condition you expected, but you can examine what is available and combine it intelligently. Resourcefulness is seeing function, not just labels. What something can help you accomplish, not only what it was originally meant to do. That is the glue trap principle. The original solution is unavailable, ineffective, or unacceptable, but the problem still has to be solved. Instead of stopping at, "We cannot do it that way," you identify what the original method was supposed to accomplish and engineer another safe, reasonable way to achieve the same required result. Resourcefulness dramatically increases independence because unfamiliarity no longer creates automatic dependence. You may still use other people, instructions, tools, and research, but you know how to mobilize those resources yourself. You are no longer waiting to be rescued from the unknown. You can build a path forward.
Level 4, the troubleshooter. At this level, the question is not simply whether you can solve a problem, it is whether you can figure out why something is not working. Troubleshooting requires you to move past the visible failure, investigate the system behind it, and identify the cause before deciding what should change. Problem solving and troubleshooting are related, but they are not identical. Problem solving asks, how can I fix the problem in front of me? Troubleshooting asks, why did this problem happen? You may be able to repair one faulty result without understanding what caused it. A troubleshooter works backward, so the same failure does not keep returning. The first thing you see is usually a symptom, not the root cause. A crooked clasp, missed deadline, or incorrect result tells you that something failed. It does not automatically tell you why. Troubleshooting means tracing the visible symptom backward through the process until you find the condition that actually created it. Before changing anything, establish a baseline. What does normal look like? What was working before? What result should the system produce under the correct conditions? A baseline gives you something stable to compare against. Without it, you can make several changes and still have no idea whether the system improved or simply changed. Once you have a baseline, change one variable at a time. If you adjust 3 settings, replace 2 parts, and change the process all at once, you may fix the problem without learning what caused it. Controlled troubleshooting isolates one factor, tests the result, and preserves enough stability for the evidence to mean something. Patterns and inconsistencies both provide evidence. Does the failure happen every time, every third time, only under one condition, or only after a certain step? Repetition can point toward a recurring cause. A single inconsistency can reveal what changed. The pattern helps narrow the problem before you start making guesses. A hypothesis is useful only if you are willing to let the evidence prove it wrong. Your first explanation may sound reasonable and still be incorrect. Strong troubleshooters do not protect the theory because it was theirs. They compare the test result to the prediction, reject what no longer fits, and redirect the investigation. Sometimes your own adjustment makes the problem worse. Competence shows in what you do next. You identify what you changed, return the system to the last known baseline, and account for the new failure before continuing. Recovering from your own mistake is part of troubleshooting. Hiding it only contaminates the evidence. Parts canon thinking means replacing one thing after another until something finally works. It can be expensive, wasteful, and misleading because the final repair does not prove every replacement was necessary. A troubleshooter uses evidence to narrow the cause first, then changes the part or condition that the evidence actually supports. Troubleshooting also includes knowing when the problem exceeds your competence. That is not the same as giving up at the first difficulty. You preserve the system, document what you observed and tested, and bring the problem to someone with the right expertise. Good escalation transfers useful evidence instead of handing over a mystery. Experience can make someone faster at recognizing familiar problems, but years alone do not make a person a strong troubleshooter. An experienced person can still guess, skip the baseline, change several variables, or defend the first theory. Troubleshooting depends on disciplined reasoning, not confidence, seniority, or the number of times you have seen something similar. Level 5, the anticipator. At this level, competence begins moving ahead of the problem. You are not only responding well when something goes wrong, you are recognizing what is likely to happen and acting early enough to prevent it. The core question is, can you solve problems before they become problems? Anticipation begins with pattern recognition. You notice what tends to happen before a problem appears: the repeated delay, the recurring shortage, or the warning sign that usually comes before failure. A single event may seem random. Repetition creates information. The anticipator uses that information to recognize what is forming before the full problem arrives. Preventive maintenance means caring for a system before it breaks. You inspect, service, clean, update, or replace what is wearing down while the system is still functioning. The work may not feel urgent because nothing has failed yet, but that is the point. A small planned interruption now can prevent a much larger disruption later. An anticipator does not wait until the last item is used before noticing that inventory is low. You understand the rate of use, the time required to replace it, and the minimum amount needed to keep operating. Reordering early protects the workflow from a shortage that was visible and preventable. Financial reserves create room to respond before pressure controls the decision. An unexpected expense is harder to manage when every available dollar is already committed. The anticipator prepares for costs that are uncertain in timing but predictable in existence. The question is not whether something will eventually require money, but whether the money will be available when it does. Contingency planning asks what could reasonably interrupt the plan and what you will do if it happens. You are not predicting every possible disaster. You are identifying the most likely points of failure, deciding which ones require preparation, and building responses before urgency removes your best options. Anticipation requires looking beyond the immediate result. A decision creates a first consequence, but that consequence may create another one after it. The anticipator asks, and then what? By reading second and third order consequences, you can recognize when a choice that solves today's problem may create a larger problem tomorrow. A bottleneck is the point where work begins accumulating faster than it can move forward. Production may still be running, but the warning signs are already visible. Growing delays, unfinished work, or one resource carrying more demand than it can sustain. The anticipator strengthens or clears that point before the entire process stops behind it. Plan B should not begin when Plan A has already failed. By then, time, money, and flexibility may already be disappearing. An anticipator prepares the alternative while the original plan is still working. That does not mean expecting failure. It means protecting the result, so one failed method does not eliminate every available path forward. Outsiders sometimes mistake anticipation for overthinking because they see the preparation but never experience the problem it prevented. From the outside, the extra inventory, backup plan, or early maintenance can look unnecessary. The anticipator understands that prevention often becomes invisible precisely because it worked. There is an enormous difference between handling emergencies well and needing fewer emergencies. Crisis management proves that you can perform under pressure. Anticipation proves that you can reduce how often preventable pressure develops at all. The highest achievement is not repeatedly rescuing the system. It is building a system that requires less rescue. Level 6, the systems builder. At this level, the question becomes, can the result happen reliably without heroic effort? You are no longer proving how much you can personally handle. You are designing the process so correct results can happen repeatedly, even when you are not the person carrying every step. When the same problem keeps returning, repeatedly solving it is not enough. A systems builder studies what consistently works and turns that solution into a repeatable process. The knowledge moves out of one person's head and into a structure that other people can follow, maintain, and improve. Checklists protect familiar work from familiar omissions. They are not substitutes for competence. They preserve competence when attention is divided, the workload is heavy, or a routine step becomes easy to overlook. A strong checklist captures the critical actions that must happen every time without making people reconstruct the process from memory. A standard operating procedure explains how the work should be completed, what standard the result must meet, and what to do when the normal process changes. The goal is not to document every movement, it is to make the work teachable, repeatable, and less dependent on whoever happens to remember how it was done last time. Automation removes repetitive work that does not require repeated human judgment. A systems builder identifies stable tasks that technology can perform consistently, then builds controls around the automated process. The goal is not automation for its own sake. It is preserving human attention for the decisions where human judgment actually adds value. Environmental design makes the correct action easier to perform and the incorrect action harder to perform. Tools are stored where they are used, materials follow the order of the workflow, and the physical space communicates what happens next. Instead of depending on constant reminders, the environment itself helps guide consistent behavior. Redundancy protects a critical result from a single point of failure. That may mean backup equipment, duplicate records, cross-trained people, or another way to complete essential work. Redundancy is not waste when one predictable failure could stop the entire operation. It is deliberately preserving continuity when the primary resource becomes unavailable. Quality control verifies that the system is producing the result it was designed to produce. Standards, measurements, samples, and defined checkpoints make quality visible before the work reaches the customer. Without quality control, a system can repeat the same mistake efficiently. Reliability requires both consistency and a way to confirm that the consistent result is correct. People will become distracted, misunderstand instructions, forget steps, and make predictable mistakes. A systems builder designs around that reality. Fixtures, safeguards, defaults, warnings, and physical constraints prevent common errors from becoming full failures. The system does not require people to be flawless in order to produce dependable work. Extremely capable people can get stuck below this level because they are good at rescuing situations. Their competence keeps the operation moving, but it also allows the broken system to survive unchanged. When you can repeatedly save the day, dysfunction can begin to feel normal. Your strength becomes the reason the underlying weakness is never repaired. The shift is from, "I can handle anything," to, "This should not require handling every time." Personal capability still matters, but it is no longer the operating system. The systems builder removes recurring emergencies, distributes knowledge, and creates dependable structures, so the result does not require extraordinary effort from the same person again and again. Level 7. The Force Multiplier. At this level, your competence no longer improves only your own performance. It increases what other people and the entire operation can accomplish. The core question is, does your competence increase everyone else's capacity? A force multiplier can make sound decisions without having complete information. You identify what is known, what remains uncertain, and which risks matter most. Instead of waiting for perfect clarity, you use judgment to choose the strongest available direction while remaining prepared to adjust as new information appears. At this level, you see beyond the task directly in front of you. You understand how people, resources, timing, standards, and decisions affect one another across the entire system. That wider view helps you solve problems without improving one area at the expense of everything connected to it. Elite competence is not limited to problems you have already seen. You can enter unfamiliar territory, identify what the situation is revealing, and separate symptoms from the underlying cause. Your exact experience may be new, but your diagnostic process still gives you a reliable place to begin. A force multiplier does not merely tell people which button to press. You teach them what information matters, why the process works, and how to evaluate situations that do not match the example. Instructions create compliance with one task. Teaching people how to think builds judgment they can carry into new problems. Delegating outcomes means making the required result, boundaries, resources, and standards clear, then allowing another capable person to determine the steps. Micromanaging transfers the work without transferring ownership. Real delegation expands capacity because the responsibility and the authority to complete it move together. A force multiplier deliberately develops people who can carry the work forward. You expose them to real decisions, explain your reasoning, and gradually increase the weight they can hold. The goal is not to remain permanently indispensable. It is to build successors whose competence allows the entire operation to grow beyond your individual reach. High standards become limiting when one person must personally inspect, approve, or correct everything. A force multiplier makes the standard clear enough for other capable people to recognize and protect it. Quality remains high, but progress no longer waits for your attention at every checkpoint. The strongest systems do not collapse when their builder steps away. Knowledge is documented, authority is distributed, and capable people understand how to respond when conditions change. Your absence may still be noticed, but it does not become an emergency. The system continues because its strength was never stored in one person alone. Knowing how to solve a problem does not mean you should always step in and solve it. Sometimes intervention protects the immediate result, but prevents someone else from developing judgment. A force multiplier knows when the risk requires action and when allowing another capable person to work through the problem will strengthen the system. The paradox of elite competence is that success eventually means fewer things require you personally. Your judgment still shapes the operation, but it now moves through the people, standards, and systems you developed. Your greatest value is no longer how many problems you can personally solve. It is how much becomes possible because of what you built.